that they were going to see serious setbacks in gubernatorial races. As of midnight Eastern time, which is right about now as we're speaking, the Democrats haven't lost a single seat in the Senate so far. They have still not lost the House. They have had some setbacks. They've had some losses, but they've also won a lot of seats that they didn't expect to win. And in governorships, it looks like that in the of the 5 sort of battleground states that Donald Trump flipped in 2020 or 2016, or I put it this way: the 5 battleground states he won in 2016 that were flipped in 2020, 4 of those look like they could end up at the end of the night with a Democratic governor. That's Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and it's looking like possibly Arizona. And so this has been a very, very different night than anyone predicted.
You mentioned the historic aspect of it. You texted me before we went on air, and I say this because I don't want to take credit for it, that oddly, this might have been, historically speaking, if you put it in historic context, actually one of the better nights for a president's party in their first term in office for a midterm election outcome.
That's exactly right. On average, since Franklin Roosevelt, since the early 1960s, say, since Lyndon Johnson's presidency, in the first midterm after a president takes office, the party of that president has lost 31 seats in the House of Representatives. That's not going to happen tonight. We're echoing here a little bit, Mitch. Can you hear me?
I can still hear you.
I'm getting a very kind of crazy feedback here.
Okay, John, there we go. I fixed that there. Forgive me.
Okay. No, don't worry. So bottom line is that since Johnson, in the first midterm of a new president, usually lose about 31 seats in the House of Representatives. The Democrats aren't going to lose anything like that tonight. They'll lose some seats. They might even lose control of the House of Representatives, but it's not going to be any kind of shift of that sort. And in the Senate, usually you lose 2 seats. In fact, for new Democratic presidents, that would be if you're looking at Carter in 78 in that midterm, in Clinton in 94, and Obama in 2010, you lose a lot more Senate seats. And that's just not going to happen tonight. Bottom line is that I think, to the surprise of a lot of people and a lot of pundits, it looks like Joe Biden's going to have a pretty good night. And that was summed up just a moment ago, Mitch, and you may not have seen it. Right as I was waiting to come on with you, I've got CNN on in the background here, and they had Manu Raju, their national political correspondent, congressional correspondent. He was at the House Republican headquarters in Washington, and it was all decorated, and it was where Kevin McCarthy was supposed to declare his huge victory tonight. And the incredible thing was that the the trailer on the bottom of the screen said, "McCarthy waits to address crowd as many races remain to be decided." Well, okay, that's cool, except there was no crowd in the room. It was empty. Behind Manu Raju, no one was there. And I think that sums it up better than anything. I think Republicans thought they were going to have a great big night, and by midnight, maybe even earlier, they were going to be able to declare that they had control of Congress. They weren't able to do that.
John Nichols, it sounds like you're not quite ready to declare Republicans controlling the House of Representatives. And if I'm wrong on that, you'll correct me. But we are in a situation, if Republicans win, or even if they don't win, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the local lawmaker here for us in the San Francisco Bay Area, who also happens to be the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, first woman to become Speaker of the House of Representatives. She's now second time the leader of the House of Representatives. If her party is unable to maintain and of course, there was the attack against her husband, Paul Pelosi, recently. And in a recent interview on CNN, she indicated that attack may inform whether or not she even serves her next session in Congress. If she loses the speakership in this election, what do you think that means for Nancy Pelosi?
Well, it's a tough way to go out. Usually, you'd like to leave on your own terms. If you've lost the speakership and are now titularly the leader of the opposition, um, that's a tougher place to stand down from. But the fact of the matter is, for Nancy Pelosi, what just a few days ago was being described as or portrayed as a real serious setback, where the Democrats would lose perhaps dozens of seats. Now it's looking like a situation where, as you correctly suggest, we still don't know that the House of Representatives is going to flip. I think it probably is because of just the pattern of seats and where the gerrymandering is, and there's still a lot of races to be declared. But if the Republicans take control, it's going to be by a very narrow margin. Really, not the great rebuke that people thought. So Nancy Pelosi is going to be able to say that she led her party through a very difficult midterm election cycle and did surprisingly well. I think surprisingly by comparison to what a lot of pundits were saying. Look at who's won tonight. Abigail Spanberger, who was in a very, very tough race in Virginia. They won another of the tough races in Virginia. Marcy Kaptur up in Northwest Ohio, drawn into a seat that was a pro-Trump territory, and yet she looks to be winning by like a 53, 44 or 56-44 margin, a very good victory there. And I can point to races across the country where Democrats who were supposed to be in trouble are actually, doing well tonight, running ahead of expectations. So for Nancy Pelosi, that's a situation where she can say, look, we did good. And in that circumstance, my sense is that she's the evidence has been suggesting that she's likely to stand down and to leave the leadership. And I think she may well do that. But she certainly isn't going to be hounded out of it, as somebody who, suffered a terrible setback. She's actually, again, in a situation where, her party has done much better than expected. And if you look at the last interviews that Nancy Pelosi did before the midterms, and these were, of course, really tough interviews where she was talking about what had happened to her husband and, the political violence and all the issues that are of such great concern to us now. But it was interesting that in those interviews, she still held out hope that Democrats could do quite well this year. And the evidence is that she was more right than we expected.
John Nichols, let's look at the Senate. Right now, we don't know nobody really knows at this moment who's going to end up being who's control of the Senate. It might come once again. You mentioned that no Democrats have lost their seats yet, but no Republicans have either. And
That's
one of
right.
the races, and we have several close races, including in your state of Wisconsin, but we might come down to Georgia again, just like we did 2 years ago, where it doesn't appear at this moment where either Raphael Warnock or Herschel Walker are going to get that 50% plus one vote in order to outright win. Very good chance this goes to a runoff in December. And once again, like 2 years ago, it might be what ends up determining who controls the Senate.
100% right, Mitch. Look, going into tonight, there were 5, 6, maybe 7 Senate races that were considered too close to call. And most of them went to the party, appears so far to have gone to the party that currently held them. And so, for instance, there were a lot of people that thought Maggie Hassan was going to get beat up in New Hampshire. She's a Democrat. She won an easy victory up there. There is, in Ohio, it looked like a tight race, but J.D. Vance has held a Republican seat with a pretty easy victory. In Florida, Marco Rubio won, very big victory down there. And in North Carolina, where there was thought to be a close race, it was a Republican seat held by Ted Budd, a Republican. So, you know what I mean? It basically sorted out, to the party that was there. In Wisconsin, it's a close race, but it looks like a good chance that Ron Johnson, the Republican, will hold on to that seat. And it also is starting to look like in Arizona, Senator Kelly, a Democrat, is likely to hold on to his seat. So again, we keep ending up with, kind of sticking where we were. So this is what we're down to as we look at things at midnight on the East Coast. And that is that we don't know what's going to happen in Nevada. Senator Cortez Masto, a Democrat, has been in a very, very tough race. Most polls had showed her behind. As we've noted tonight, Democrats are running better than expected, so perhaps those polls were off, but we don't know that yet. What we do have a good possibility of is that John Fetterman is going to win in Pennsylvania. That is not assured, but he is ahead, and it's looking more and more like there's a good chance that he will win that seat. So let's say that Cortez Masto loses in Nevada, not assured, but let's say then that John Fetterman wins. Then we're going to be, right back at that situation where the Democrats have to win Georgia to have the 50-50 split. I hope I've got my numbers right. I think I do.
Yeah. And John, we're down to our final minute, but I feel like the victory of Ron DeSantis in Florida is significant. It was huge. A major. He won by big numbers over, another prominent Florida politician, Charlie Crist. But furthermore, kind of opposite of California. In California, all of our statewide lawmakers are Democrats. Now in Florida, all of their statewide elected officials are Republicans. And it makes me think this is putting Ron DeSantis, if he chooses to run and challenge Donald Trump for the Republican nomination, he might be a formidable force.
Well, it certainly had a good night. And I think two things important to recognize. First, Florida is no longer a swing state. It's increasingly looking like a Republican red state. Now that could shift, but Democrats did not do well there this midterm election. And DeSantis did very, very well at a time when Donald Trump was making fun of him, was poking fun at him. And so, this is an interesting night because at least some of the candidates who Donald Trump brought into the political process, people like J.D. Vance in Ohio. Now, Vance has won, but Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania may well lose. Herschel Walker has not won the seat in Georgia and may well lose it. And so Trump's got a mixed record tonight, whereas DeSantis is looking at a very big victory. So does that shuffle the things within the Republican Party? A little bit. I think you're right. It does give DeSantis an opening to suggest that he is a younger, more electable alternative to Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, I think, could be a little weakened by what happens tonight. But at the end of the day, I warn you that Donald Trump has a remarkable skill within the Republican Party for destroying his opponents. And he already seems to be, aching to get into that fight. So I would not write him off quite yet.
So much there. They're both in Florida.
I know.
But we have to leave it. We have to leave it right there. But John Nichols of The Nation magazine, I thank you for taking the time to join us tonight.
Pleasure to talk to you, Mitch. Be strong.
And you're listening to KPFA's special coverage of the 2022 midterm election. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Coming up at the bottom of the hour, Mark Miracle and Ariel Boone will be giving us coverage on local election results. But right now, of course, one of the big issues in this election has been concerning the right to an abortion, especially after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. There are 5 ballot initiatives throughout the country in different states, 5 different states dealing with abortion specifically, in which voters are going to the polls to vote on, including here in California, where we have Proposition 1, which is a constitutional right to reproductive freedom, as we're speaking right now, that has it's overwhelmingly in favor of and most likely to be passed. And Kentucky, there's another constitutional amendment that would make it not, that would clarify that there is no right to an abortion. In Michigan, another constitutional question is once again, making it a constitutional right for reproductive freedom. In Montana, there's another one it's called the Born Alive Infants Regulation. And then in Vermont, another constitutional right to reproductive autonomy. Well, for more on what's happening in this election concerning abortion rights, I'm joined by Shannon Oliveri Hovis. Shannon Oliveri Hovis is the California State Director of NARAL. Shannon Oliveri Hovis, thank you so much for taking time to join us tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. And as I mentioned all those, it's actually looking to be a pretty good night for proponents of abortion rights. In each of these, whether if it's a constitutional protection for the right to an abortion, or in Kentucky and Montana, which are trying to use the Constitution to restrict abortion rights, those two are actually losing. The other three that are affirmative for abortion rights are all winning. So I guess it's a good night for you.
It really is. And, it just affirms what we have long known, which is that support for reproductive freedom is overwhelming. 8 in 10 Americans, and consistently we see that 8 in 10 Americans support the legal right to abortion. They do not believe that the government should be interfering in these most personal and intimate decisions in people's lives, and decisions that are so integral to one's own body, their life, their future, how they're able to plan for their families. And so we are, Proposition 1 is looking really, really solid. It is absolutely on track to win. MSNBC has already called in that race. And in Vermont, they've also already called that constitutional amendment has passed. So we are very hopeful. But again, it's indicative of what we have long known, which is there's overwhelming support for reproductive freedom.
Were you surprised by both Kentucky and Montana with voters rejecting changes to try to, I guess in some of these states, including Kentucky, it's still illegal to get an abortion, but they still voted. It looks like they're voting. 85% of the vote counted. The no has a 5 percentage point lead on this. Were you surprised that these two states went as they did?
Not at all. It harkens to what we saw in Kansas, which again is that overwhelming majorities, even in very red states, support reproductive freedom. And so the fact that, these anti-choice ballot initiatives are being defeated in red states like Kentucky and in Montana just reaffirms what we've seen and what we understand. Overturning Roe v. Wade was clearly a galvanizing force for so many people across this country. We have had a constitutional right for the last 50 years. I'm 37 years old, and my entire life, in fact, for a majority of Americans living, our entire lives have been spent understanding that this is our right, that it is our right to determine if and when and how to start or grow a family. And so you can't just take away a right like that without thinking that people are going to be outraged and have a real reaction to that. Here in California, we're doing everything we can to ensure that the right to reproductive freedom is protected for generations. And that requires doing what we're doing with Proposition 1, specifically naming these rights in our state constitution, the strongest thing that we can do to ensure that these protections last and are not subject to or at the whim of any political shifting in the state. And Michigan looks, well positioned to do something similar. Vermont just did, and it's no surprise that even in Kentucky and Montana, the anti-choice initiatives look poised to fail.
How do you feel the issue of abortion rights played into congressional races and who's going to control Congress? There are some pundits here towards the end, leading into today's election, suggesting that perhaps Democrats were too focused on abortion rights and other things like democracy rather than just focusing on straight economic issues. How do you see that whole issue in this election?
Well, I'm so glad you put it that way, because truly there is no more economic issue than abortion and the right to abortion. The ability to choose and decide if and when to start a family or grow a family, that is an extraordinarily economic decision. And anybody who has had children or gone through that process of even contemplating children understands what that means. And so there truly is reproductive freedom and economic freedom are integrally linked to one another. So I think that Americans really went to the polls this election understanding that this is an economic freedom issue. This is an economic issue. You know, we saw that poll after poll, exit polls, have shown that abortion is the number one issue for voters in states all across the country. It's what we anticipated. It's what we saw immediately after Roe fell. But then there has been this concern, well, did we overplay that hand? No, people are infuriated that this is the state of our lives, that we have to, for those of us who do have children, we are looking at them thinking that we are leaving them a world where they have less rights than we have had. This is unconscionable. And so it is, I think, no surprise that we really are seeing the issue of reproductive freedom showing up at the ballot box across races this election cycle.
We're down to our final minute here, but now after this midterm election, what's next when it comes to the fight for abortion rights? Where will the focus be?
There are so many pieces to this fight, right? If we are able to gain ground in the Senate, if we are able to hold the House, and these contested races are so close at this point, but we have an opportunity to pass a federal protection to enshrine the protections that existed with Roe v. Wade into federal law. And President Biden has said that was as the first thing that he would sign if we're able to hold the House and gain ground in the Senate. So that is one avenue that we are, of course, looking at. We know that anti-choice Republicans in Congress are poised to pass a national abortion ban if we let them take control of Congress. Senator Lindsey Graham already introduced a national abortion ban. And so the ground that we gain, what we have to do in Congress is crystal clear. And then beyond that, we must go state by state, ban by ban, and regain control, because right now in the current environment, there are 22 million women of reproductive age who do not have access to essential abortion care in their home states. And if they need that care, they are forced to travel out of state to get that care. That's almost 30% of all women of reproductive age in the country. So there's a lot at stake here.
Well, we are going to have to leave it there. The tyranny of the clock, but Shannon Oliveri Hovis, the California State Director with NARAL, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And you are listening to KPFA's special coverage of the 2022 midterm election. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Coming up, we are going to, in the second half of this hour, hear more about local elections with Mark Miracle and Ariel Boone. And we're also going to be getting the latest returns from Max Pringle. Stay tuned.
Newsom is polling at about 60%, with his Republican rival Brian Dahle at about 38%. Newsom addressed supporters shortly after polls closed. He referenced the state's apparent passage of Proposition 1 that enshrines reproductive choice in the state's constitution.
We are a freedom state, that we support the rights of women and girls, reproductive care, reproductive rights now are enshrined in the Constitution of the state of California. Contraceptive rights are enshrined in the Constitution of the state of California. Privacy is enshrined. That's a point of pride.
In the state's other propositions, Prop 26, which would allow sports betting on tribal lands, is trailing early with 55% against. Prop 27, which would legalize online sports betting, is also going down big with 72% against. Prop 28, which would increase school arts funding, is polling at about 76% in favor. And Prop 29, which regulates staffing of kidney dialysis clinics, has about 60% support. Prop 30, the closely watched measure to tax the wealthy to support electric car purchases in the state, has about 68% support. And Prop 31, which upholds the state's ban on the sale of flavored tobacco, has about 76% support. Meanwhile, Democratic U.S. Senator Alex Padilla is projected to keep his seat. With about 30% of precincts reporting, Padilla is polling at about 64% to Republican challenger and Southern California attorney Mark Mooser's 36%. In the race to replace outgoing Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, Congresswoman Karen Bass trails challenger and real estate billionaire Rick Caruso early. Bass is polling at about 49%. Caruso leads with about 51%. Caruso spent about $100 million in his campaign. In two big Bay Area mayor's races, Oakland City Council member Lauren Taylor has about 35% of the vote in the first round of ranked choice voting. Fellow council member Xing Tao has about 29% so far. They're both running to replace termed-out Mayor Libby Schaaf. In San Jose's mayor's race, council member Matt Mahan was holding a slight lead with about 50.3% of the vote to Santa Clara County Supervisor Cindy Chavez's 49.6% of the vote. They're running to fill outgoing Mayor Sam Liccardo, who's also termed out. In San Francisco Prop M, the vacancy tax measure has about 55% support. In Berkeley, another vacancy tax initiative, also called Measure M, is winning with 61% of the vote. In the race for district attorney in San Francisco, current DA Brooke Jenkins has 49% support to challenger John Hamasaki's 33%. In the District 6 supervisor's race, Matt Dorsey has about 56% support to challenger Honey Mahogany's 38%. In the South Bay race to replace outgoing Congresswoman Jackie Speer, Kevin Mullen has about 57% support to challenger David Canepa's 43%. In the District 12 North Bay Assembly District, Damon Connolly has about 54% of the vote to fellow Democrat Sarah Amanzade's 45%. Those are some of the latest state and local returns. I'm Max Pringle for KPFA.
And I'm Mark Miracle, along with Ariel Boone. And for the next half hour, we'll be bringing you returns and analysis from elections in Oakland, Berkeley, San Francisco, the North Bay, the South Bay, as well as the state candidates and measures before we return to national returns at the top of the hour with Mitch Jeserich of Letters and Politics. We'll start in San Francisco, and we'll start with Tim Redmond, editor and founder of the online news service 44 Hills, who's been covering San Francisco politics for some 30 plus years. Tim Redmond, thanks for joining us tonight on the midterm election coverage here on KPFA.
Happy to be here with you.
What, in your opinion, what is the most crucial issue or candidates race on the ballot in San Francisco on this election day?
Well, the key candidate races are the supervisor races in District 4 and in District 6. That will determine whether the progressives maintain a veto-proof majority on the Board of Supervisors. And right now, it is looking as if the candidates backed by the mayor, that is Joel Engardio and Matt Dorsey, are ahead. It's hard to tell because we only have 26% of the vote in. And when you get that 26% in, you don't really know where in the district it's coming from. We'll know more actually in about 15 or 20 minutes. But it looks like Joel Engardio has a fairly substantial lead. He has a fairly narrow lead, and Matt Dorsey has a fairly substantial lead over Honey Mahogany. Interestingly, the three challengers for the community college board seats are leading the incumbents, and it looks like people want to change there. At the same time, though, the voters are rejecting the parcel tax that would save City College by bringing in the money that it needs. So it's kind of mixed results there. Prop L, which is the tax to allow Muni to borrow money for desperately needed renovations to the fleet, is up at about 69%. But again, that's very dangerous because they need 66%. So we don't know for sure. We do know that the effort to reopen JFK Drive and the Great Highway to Cars seems to have failed. That seems to have failed overwhelmingly. The vacancy tax is up slightly. But again, this is early returns with just 26% of the vote in. And I'm told by the Department of Elections that we'll get more returns in about 15 minutes.
And how about the district attorney's race?
It's no surprise. I mean, the incumbent had, all of the money and all of the media coverage, and John Hamasaki made a good run for it, but he started late, and it was going to be very difficult to raise money. However, there have been numerous ethical issues raised about the district attorney in the weeks right before the election, and she, depending on the outcome of Prop H, will have to run again in either a year or 2 years, and I think we will see another challenge to her.
Why is that such an important race in your mind?
Because the district attorney really controls the direction of criminal justice in San Francisco, and it happens on two levels. And one is deciding, for example, the current district attorney, Brooke Jenkins, is talking about essentially restarting the war on drugs and arresting not just big time drug dealers, but small time drug users in the Tenderloin, and shifting the city's focus, which used to treat drug abuse as a public health issue, and turning it back into a criminal justice issue. But also, her predecessor, Chesa Boudin, actually attempted to prosecute police officers who had used excessive force and sometimes lethal force against people when he said that was improper. I do not think we're going to see that level of police accountability under Brooke Jenkins.
And how about the housing measures?
Close.
Yeah.
It looks like Prop D, which is the YIMBY-backed and Merrill-backed measure, is very, very close. Prop E, the one backed by the supervisors, is not doing as well. At this point, again, it's too early to make predictions, but it looks like we have a very frustrated, crabby electorate that is rejecting a lot of what is going on at City Hall, except for the district attorney's race. And it looks like at this point, it is more of a victory for the mayor and her allies than for the progressive movement. But we won't really know for another 20 minutes or half hour.
And can you characterize what's at stake with Prop D and Prop E?
Yeah, I mean, the whole question is, how are we going to build affordable housing in San Francisco? And the Prop D measure is, let us clear roadblocks for developers to build market rate housing, and hope in the neoliberal vision of capitalism that eventually prices will trickle down and housing costs will come down. That has never happened. Prop E is a measure that basically says, sure, we'll clear roadblocks, we'll make it easier, but only for actually affordable housing and not for market rate housing. So this is a really important policy discussion. Of course, at the same time, no one is building any market rate housing right now because of market conditions, which just goes to show, you think, well, gee, if we just let developers do whatever they want, they'll build a lot of housing and the price will come down. Well, right now, no matter what the regulations are, it's got nothing to do with the regulations. The return on investment isn't high enough, so they aren't building anything.
And how about the Prop M, the vacancy apartment tax? What's the idea behind that?
It's up narrowly. The idea is there's 60,000 vacant units now in San Francisco. And if some of those units came on the market, it might actually bring rents down. 60,000 vacant units. Think about that. And the idea is to encourage landlords, speculators, big property owners who have a lot of vacant units not on the market to rent them out. Or if they don't rent them out, to tax them at a level that will help us build more affordable housing.
All right, Tim Redmond, founder of 48 Hills. I think I left out a few hills earlier when I introduced you. Thank you for joining us tonight and talking about the ballot measures and the candidates in San Francisco. And now we're going to.
I will be on Upfront at 7:30 tomorrow with more results.
All right. 7:30 on Upfront on KPFA tomorrow morning with Tim Redmond of 48 Hills, long a journalist and covering San Francisco. We're going to turn now from San Francisco to the East Bay and KPFA's Ariel Boone.
We are watching several races, including the mayoral race. One of our biggest priorities is City Council District 2. We are also very watching all of the City Council races, but those two races in Oakland are really important to us, is mayoral race and District 2 City Council for Nikki Fortunato Bass. And then at Alameda County level, we're also looking at the district attorney race and the board of supervisors race. From big privatizers who are really trying to change the face of Oakland, and who have been doing that under the administration of Libby Schaaf, our current mayor. And with the potential of having three very strong progressive candidates, truly progressive candidates of Sheng Tao, Elisa Victory, and Greg Hodge, we're hoping that we're going to see the change in tide of that, because these are the folks that are backed with folks from the community and have really rejected taking funds from developers and from the coal industry. And I think this is a critical change for Oakland, and this is a great opportunity for us to see a progressive mayor that will see an administration that puts Oaklanders first and really prioritizes the need of community over developers and corporations. Well, I actually want to say that as of this morning, we had 23% early mail-in ballots counted as of this morning. And then, we had done poll monitoring, where that means we had some folks go out into community, into the polling stations, and just watch how things were flowing. I went down to the main library and from 6:30 to 7:30, and just watched hundreds of people walk through the door and hit the polls. And I think that what really shows is that Oaklanders were excited about coming out to vote. And one of the things that we were hearing from people as Oakland Rising Action, I just want to be very clear, that we were hearing from folks in the community who were saying, oh, I actually didn't know that the mayoral race was happening. I didn't know this was important. Thank you for telling me, and now I'm going to go out and vote. I think one of the things that that happens often in Oakland is that flatland voters are discounted, that people don't go talk to folks in the flatlands. And I think this is an important and critical part of our electoral process, when 60% of Oaklanders are renters, 60% of Oakland lives in the flatlands, and these are folks of color, immigrant communities, formerly incarcerated, systems impacted people. And when campaigns and candidates ignore people that live in the flatlands, it is to us a real sign of where they want to maintain power. And when we talk to folks in the flatlands, they say, oh, no one talked to us yet. Thanks for coming to talk to us. And I think that's one of the major barriers, is that folks think when they talk about flatland voters, they think they're disengaged. And in fact, no one's talking to them. but progressive meaning the more you make, the more you pay. This modernizes our progressive business tax system that has mom and pops paying the same rate as large corporations within the same category. This changes that, and this actually gives a tax break to small businesses and requires our large corporations to pay a higher rate. And this is going to bring over $20 million a year to our general fund. And, our general fund pays for things like our parks and our public works and our libraries and services that are really critical to Oakland. And I really believe that passing this is going to be important for us. And the compromise was really brought forward. The progressive business tax was led for 2 years by Nikki Fortunato Bass, our city council president, and our mayoral candidate Sheng Tao on her role as city council pro tem, really brought together the people to the table to be able to have a compromise. And we're already seeing very high results, and we hope that it stays through as the rest of the ballots are continuing to count. But so far, it looks like 68% of Oaklanders are in favor of Measure T. Thank you.
And the hottest race in the South Bay is probably for the mayor of San Jose, the largest city in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I believe one of the largest in the country. And we're joined by Jenna Cotta, who is a reporter for the San Jose Spotlight, an online news service. Jenna, thanks for joining us tonight. Jenna Cotta, are you with us? Jenna Cotta. Well, I guess we don't have Jenna with us, and I'll have to carry it myself. The San Jose mayor's race between Cindy Chavez, who's the Santa Clara County Supervisor, and Matt Mahan, who's a first-term member of the San Jose City Council. The incumbent, Sam Liccardo, is termed out, and both Cindy Chavez, the Santa Clara County Supervisor, and Matt Mahan, the first-term San Jose councilman, would like to take Sam Liccardo's place. And to discuss that possibility is Jenna Cotta of the San Jose Spotlight. Jenna?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's an exciting night down here in San Jose.
Well, what do you think about this mayor's race?
Well, it is so incredibly close. We just got our latest update at 9:30, and we're seeing that Matt Mahan is leading with about 2,000 more votes, but he still has 50% of the votes. So it's too close to call.
Who is Matt Mahan, and what does he stand for?
Yeah, so Matt Mahan is a San Jose council member. He is the newbie in this race. He served on the council for 2 years, and he represents the more business interest side of things in San Jose. He's facing off against Cindy Chavez, a longtime Politico in the Silicon Valley. She serves as a county supervisor right now, and she is the labor candidate. So those are kind of the interests that we're seeing kind of face off in this race.
And what would you, besides Cindy Chavez being backed by labor, Matt Mahan backed more by the business community, what policy differences would they have?
Yeah, so it's really, when we get to the nitty gritty, that's where you see their differences. Generally speaking, both candidates really want to address increasing crime, increasing homelessness, and blight in San Jose. And really what they're looking at are two different things. Chavez says she's got the experience to do this, and she wants to continue on the same path, building more affordable housing, Mahan wants a little bit more accountability when it comes to, city decisions. So he's looking at using metrics and data-driven goals to kind of get San Jose to where it needs to be. He wants more cost-effective measures for affordable housing. He thinks that the city has been spending too much money for not enough results. So when we really look at it, it's small policy differences, but the general goal is the same.
And what other races are you watching tonight?
Well, we've got a couple of exciting races down here. The downtown council seat, looks like we can almost call it. Omar Torres is a Evergreen Community College trustee, and he's ahead with 63% of the vote, facing off against Irene Smith, who is also a political newcomer. She has not served in any political capacity. She comes from a small business owner background, mental health professional. So that's probably the seat where we're seeing the most difference between the candidates. But we also have an exciting race in the east side of San Jose, where an incumbent may actually lose her seat. Maya Esparza is trailing behind Biandone, a fire captain, who is ahead with a good amount of votes. So it's pretty exciting here. Some things we didn't expect to see, but we're also looking at the Santa Clara County Supervisor seat. For that one, we have a former San Jose council member, Johnny Camus, facing off against a current San Jose council member, Sylvia Arenas. And Arenas, who is also the Labor candidate, is taking the lead in this one. And she's taking the lead by a good amount. So while it's still too close to call, it looks like it may be going her way.
And the South Bay and San Mateo County is also electing a new member of Congress, with Jackie Spear retiring. Kevin Mullen, who was an assistant, an aide to Jackie Spear, and is now a state assemblyman, taking on David Capana, who's a San Mateo County supervisor. Anything that strikes you about that race?
Actually, I wish I could comment on that race, but we're very hyper-focused on San Jose, Silicon Valley. What I could tell you about is this close race between Aisha Wahab and Lily May. So Aisha Wahab, who is a Hayward council member, is facing off against May, who's the first Asian American woman and Asian American mayor in Fremont. May is taking the lead ahead of Wahab with about 1,000 more votes, 44% of the ballots counted. So again, can't call it yet, but they're fighting for the Senate seat, the District 10 Senate seat that represents parts of Alameda, Santa Clara County, so Hayward, Fremont, Milpitas, North San Jose.
Jenna Cotta of the San Jose Spotlight, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
To talk about San Jose and South Bay issues. And now joining us is someone who can talk about housing issues that are proliferating on the ballots in Northern California. Bob Allen, who is the Policy and Advocacy Campaign Director for the Urban Habitat. Bob, out of all the housing issues on the ballot in Northern California, which one strikes you as most important?
Well, I think the trend that we're looking at that's really exciting is, grassroots organizing groups, community groups going to the ballot, not waiting for elected leaders to take action. But the measures such as the vacancy tax in San Francisco, which last I looked 2 minutes ago was still in the lead, I think is really encouraging. Policies like the rent cap in the city of Richmond and the other vacancy tax measures, going onto the ballot really show the power of what happens when the frontline communities, those most impacted, I think, by the housing crisis of Bay Area, push a really transformative agenda. And I think that's what we're excited about tonight.
And you've got, in Oakland, you've got the Measure V, the extension of eviction protections.
Absolutely. The last few election cycles, we've seen, again, frontline communities go to the ballot to try to address the crisis that's being, brought into their communities by the rising tide of corporate landlords and speculation. And I think, again, you see that combination of going after vacant properties, trying to strengthen tenant protections, and really expand a really progressive vision for housing justice. And I want to emphasize, not just in the big cities that have been the epicenter of these crises, but in the suburbs where we've got communities changing demographically really rapidly because of this eviction crisis, the displacement crisis. And we see in those communities rents are increasing, but some of those suburban communities, they don't have eviction protections and the renter protections. And those are homes that were bought by corporations during the last foreclosure crisis. So it's I think, really exciting to see what folks are doing in the suburbs.
When everybody thinks about inflation, they immediately think of gasoline prices, but rent is a significant part of the inflationary spiral in this country right now, correct? And it's Robert Allen of the Urban Habitat Policy and Advocacy Campaign Director with that organization, which is a housing justice organization in Berkeley. You're listening to election night coverage here on KPFA in Berkeley, 94.1 FM, KPFB in Berkeley, 89.3 FM, KFCF in Fresno, 88.1 FM. KPFA and KFCF.org. And perhaps you're following us on social media, Facebook at KPFA 94.1, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch TV at KPFA Radio. I'm Mark Miracle.
Seeing the KPFA special broadcast covering the midterm election of 2022. I'm Mitch Jeserich with Ariel Boone and Mark Miracle and the whole team at KPFA working hard to bring you this broadcast. Stay tuned for this next hour in which we will continue to bring you the latest news concerning congressional races that will determine who controls the United States Senate and the House of Representatives. And we'll have further analysis and updates concerning local elections up and down the state of California and throughout the Bay Area. But first, we get the latest news headlines with Eileen Alfandary.
Predictions of a red tsunami for Republicans have not come to pass tonight. Control of the Senate is still up for grabs. Republicans need to pick up just one Senate seat to win a majority. Tonight, they have won one of the closely contested contests in Ohio, where Donald Trump supporter J.D. Vance prevailed over Democratic Congressman Tim Ryan. In New Hampshire, Democratic incumbent Senator Maggie Hassan held on to her seat. Several of the other close contests remain undecided. In Georgia, Democratic incumbent Raphael Warnock has pulled slightly ahead of Trump-backed Republican Herschel Walker. There is a Libertarian candidate in the race, too. If no candidate wins an outright majority, there'll be a runoff in December. In Pennsylvania, Democrat John Fetterman has a 1 percentage point lead over Trump-supported Republican Mehmet Oz. Nevada Democratic incumbent Senator Catherine Cortez Masto faced a tough challenge from former Republican Attorney General Adam Laxalt, who promoted phony claims of election fraud after the 2020 presidential vote. In early returns, she is leading. In Wisconsin, incumbent Republican Ron Johnson has a 2 percentage point lead over Democrat Mandela Barnes. Republicans haven't won control of the House yet, although are expected to. If they do, it looks likely Republicans will have a slimmer majority than the blowout many analysts had predicted. Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp has won re-election tonight in his rematch with Democratic voting rights activist Stacey Abrams. Kemp prevailed with 54% of the vote to Abrams' 45%. Abrams told her election night gathering she will never stop fighting for a better Georgia.
This is a moment where despite every obstacle, we are still standing strong and standing tall and standing resolute and standing in our values. And we know Georgia deserves more. And whether we do it from the governor's mansion or from the streets, whether we do it from the Capitol or from our communities, we are going to fight for more for the state of Georgia. That is what we're here for.
In Pennsylvania, Democratic Attorney General Josh Shapiro has won the gubernatorial race against Donald Trump supporter and election denier Doug Mastriano. Mastriano chartered buses to Trump's January 6 rally that preceded the storming of the Capitol. Another closely watched gubernatorial race in Arizona hasn't been called yet. Democratic Secretary of State Katie Hobbs is 13 points ahead of Republican election denier Kari Lake, but it's too early to call that race. Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis won re-election to a second term in a victory over Democrat Charlie Crist. His victory bolsters his rise as a prominent GOP star with potential White House ambitions and continues a rightward shift for what was once considered the nation's largest swing state. DeSantis called Florida a refuge of sanity and a citadel of freedom.
We fight the woke in the legislature. We fight the woke in the schools. We fight the woke in the corporations. We will never, ever surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
The victory is certain to fuel speculation of a potential DeSantis presidential run. Donald Trump has grown frustrated with DeSantis's refusal to rule out a 2024 campaign. Late Monday, Trump told Fox News that DeSantis could hurt himself badly by running for president. Historic gubernatorial elections in Maryland and Massachusetts. Democratic Attorney General Maura Healey has been elected governor of Massachusetts, making history as the nation's first openly lesbian governor. In Maryland, Democrat Wes Moore was elected the state's first Black governor. Moore noted history was made in several other Maryland races as well.
Aruna Miller, the first immigrant and the first woman of color in the state's history to serve as lieutenant governor. Brooke Learman, our first female comptroller. Anthony Brown, our first Black attorney general. And it is and it's not lost on me that I've made a little history tonight myself as well.
Maryland Governor-elect Wes Moore. California, Michigan, and Vermont have voted to enshrine abortion rights in their state constitutions. Voters in Kentucky appear to be affirming abortion rights too, voting against an anti-abortion constitutional amendment. I'm Eileen Alfandary with Election Night News.
And you're listening to a special KPFA broadcast covering the 2022 midterm election. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Tonight's election is the first national election that this country has had since the presidential election of 2020, which former President Donald Trump claimed that the election was rigged, and that claim would cause and spur hundreds of people to march onto the U.S. Capitol and attack the Capitol on January 6th as Congress counted the Electoral College vote. Well, today in this segment, we are going to look at what's happening so far this time in this election. And joining me for that is Stephen Rosenfeld. Stephen Rosenfeld is editor-in-chief correspondent of Voting Booth, which is a project of the Independent Media Institute. You can read his writings at votingbooth.media. Stephen Rosenfeld, a good evening to you, sir.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Mitch.
So I know this is something you follow closely. Of course, not all the votes have been counted. Some of these elections and they'll be counting these elections in the days ahead as well. But are you seeing anything occur yet that is catching your attention when it comes to voting integrity?
Well, sure. It's a really interesting contrast, and it's one that we didn't quite see in 2020 in the presidential, which is there's a lot of bad behavior, impulsive reactions, overclaiming by Trump Republicans in some of the swing states. And I could talk about that in Arizona, which was sort of Exhibit A for that earlier today. On the other hand, we also heard from the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, which runs the 1-800 hotlines where people call in and they talk to lawyers who are having issues with accessing the ballot and voting, that there was some other different kinds of bad behavior in Texas, in Michigan, in Florida, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, where Trumpers were just blocking people to try to get to the polls. There were racial slurs. The racial slurs was the word used by those folks, the Lawyers Committee, not me, in their briefing. And so what you have there is a contrast where, on the one hand, the Trumpers were really quick to react in Arizona because there were some machine breakdowns, which there were plenty of them or other things like that.
This in Maricopa County?
That was Maricopa County. But, across the country, there were a half dozen states where courts ordered the polls to remain open longer because there was some problem with electronic poll books, with checking people in, or just something with the infrastructure wasn't working. But you don't get the reactions that the sky is falling, the votes are stolen before people have even stopped voting, and you don't get the national right-wing broadcasters chiming in and creating tweet storms. You don't get Trump coming in and claiming something very bad, very, very bad is happening. And it's so interesting, Mitch. You have on one side civil rights lawyers helping voters deal with this stuff, not claim the stuff is stolen, and on the other side, you've got the Trumpers just being really paranoid, really insecure, really nervous that if something doesn't go right, oh my God, the Democrats are out to get them. So let's talk about Maricopa County, because guess what? The Democrats don't run the elections in Maricopa County. Non-Trump Republicans, disloyal Trumpers run the elections in Maricopa County, and they're attacking them earlier today. So this is, God, this is a barometer of the tribalism, paranoia, overreactions on that side. And, on the progressive side, the inclusive side, people trying to put problems in perspective and just telling people to be patient and take the steps you need to take so you can cast a vote that will count. Quite a contrast.
Stephen, is looking like Republicans may win the House of Representatives. So that's not final yet. It's not being claimed that, but very likely that they will have the majority in the House of Representatives. We don't know about the Senate, and this may go into we may have to wait until December to see what happens in Georgia if neither Warnock or Walker are able to get 50% plus one vote, which it doesn't look like they're going to be able to do. But there's still a few other races outstanding, so we don't know exactly yet. All of that said, it doesn't appear that this is going to be the red wave that I think Republicans were hoping it was going to be.
Well, that's true, Mitch. But the thing is, if you look at, a lot of election deniers are going to be elected into office. So what does that mean? That means that people who don't care about respecting the will of popular vote majorities and everything that comes with that, we don't have to enumerate that. Basically, instead, they prioritize whatever it takes to seize and hold power. And so right now, there are hundreds of election denier candidates who basically were, because they're intimidated by Trump, they're copycats of this nonsense. And so there's going to be more election denying U.S. representatives in the House, regardless of what goes on there. And because it's a winner-take-all system, there could be, if they have the majority, a lot of really ludicrous, wasteful, ridiculous inquiries, inquisitions about made-up garbage instead of dealing with the real issues that people face in their lives.
Inquiries into elections and how elections are done.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the thing is, most of the details of elections are run at the state level. So what could happen there? So, for example, not that these are red states, but South Dakota, Wyoming, they elected election denier secretaries of state. If it happens in other states that are presidential battlegrounds, I was talking to lawyers today about this. Like, what could they really do? Well, they could, no matter what Congress passes between now and the new Congress, basically to avoid a January 6th type coup, you could have states like Arizona, if Mark Finchem wins Secretary of State and Carrie Lake wins for governor, not certifying the presidential results. That's a constitutional crisis. Beyond that, a lot of these election deniers have really bad ideas about what it takes to have accurate elections. They hate computers, and they don't realize that you need to use the strengths of computers and the strengths of paper, analog and digital, different strengths, different qualities. So you can really get accurate results and balance it out and make it public and transparent. Their rhetoric, it's like listening to Newt Gingrich talk about Martin Luther King. It might be the same rhetoric that people might use, or words, on the progressive side, but what they really mean and what they're really after is completely different. And so they could really make elections more difficult, less accessible, more bureaucratic, less transparent. There's just a whole lot of stuff where, progress is slow and it can be unwound fast. So that's in the offing too. And it remains to be seen in a lot of the swing states, who will hold power. I mean, look, Florida has gone deep red. We know that. Ohio's kind of red, and it's redder. But, what's happening in Nevada? What's happening in, Wisconsin? What's happening in Michigan? These things are more up in the air. Pennsylvania's going to take a while to count. Up in the air. So that's where we're at.
It's looked like CNN has just projected that John Fetterman will win Pennsylvania over the Republican Ahmed Oz. So that is a seat that has been flipped for the Democrats. That's the first Senate seat so far to have flipped. So that is significant. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Fetterman will be replacing retiring Republican Senator Pat Toomey. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, let's just hope that's true. But the media projections don't determine who's the actual winner. You've got there's a lot of litigation in Pennsylvania, and we'll see what happens. There's also litigation, by the way, there's been in Wisconsin, and it remains to be seen, since they only started counting absentee ballots today. Can the Democratic U.S. Senate candidate catch up? Now, John Nichols, who you had on earlier, said he doesn't think so, but hundreds of thousands of people voted by mail, and most of those folks, tend to be supporting Democrats. The converse is true, by the way, when looking at the results in places like Arizona, where the Democrats are in the lead right now, but we don't know how much of an election day, which is very heavily Republican, is going to skew and undermine that. Similarly, the weather was really crummy in Nevada today, and so you had very high, mostly Democratic votes in early voting and voting by mail, and we don't know the election day turnout numbers. So these are the variables.
We're going to have to leave it right there. Steven Rosenfeld is editor-in-chief correspondent of Voting Booth. You can read his writings at votingbooth.media. Steven Rosenfeld, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It's always a pleasure. Bye for now.
And you are listening to KPFA special broadcast of its coverage of the 2020 midterm election. I'm Mitch Jeserich. I'm now happy to welcome to this broadcast Bill Gallegos. Bill Gallegos is a longtime Chicano liberation and environmental justice activist, former director of Communities for a Better Environment, and author of the Sunbelt Strategy and Chicano liberation. Bill Gallegos, a very good evening to you, sir.
Hello, Mitch. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be chatting with you once again, Bill. What are you paying most attention to? What is catching your eye here on this election night of the midterms 2022?
Well, going from local to national, I'll say here in Los Angeles, of course, we have a very, very bitter race for mayor, and we have a wealthy white developer who just recently went from Republican to Democrat, Rick Caruso, running against African-American woman with a very progressive background, Karen Bass, and that's a very, very close race right now. It's still a toss-up.
Yeah.
A toss-up. He's spent an estimated $100 million on this race, and he's clearly trying to buy the race, and he's focused a lot on Latino and Asian Pacific Islander voters, as well as more the conservative white voters that live in the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles. And we also have some other important races for the city council, for attorney general, for city attorney, and a few other races where there's clear progressives who are running for those seats and are not. And in one case, Aaron Darling, who's running in the West Los Angeles, was favored to win, but is now fairly far behind. But it's still too early to call the election there. So Los Angeles has a lot going on now with progressives, vying for these seats, and we're just right now it's just too early to say what the outcome is going to be. On the national level, I think the big red wave that was anticipated and was pretty much being promoted by the media and the Republican Party has not happened. That doesn't mean there hasn't been some important Republican victories like J.D. Vance, but I think the fact that it's not entirely out of the question that the Democrats will hold on to the House and the Senate is still up for grabs. So from the standpoint of I think the danger from this resurgent new Confederacy, I think this is a very, very important, this could be a very, very important stand against the momentum that they seem to be gathering. So I think that's important. And of course, this is a prelude to 2024, but I think the Republicans were hoping to lay a very strong foundation for those races in 2024 by taking control of the House and being able to frustrate any kind of Democratic agenda, much less a progressive agenda.
Bill Gallegos, you have a recent piece in The Nation magazine called "The Dangers of Ignoring the Latino Vote" this November. And you mean that for the Democrats, but you also mean that for the left in general. And I ask that, and I bring that up in context of here heading into this election, there was a lot of media coverage about more Latino voters starting to turn towards the Republican Party in this midterm election. One, do you think that was an accurate description of what happened in this election cycle? And overall, tell me more about your thoughts about how Latinos are seen during these elections.
Well, I think a lot of the articles that were making that assertion about Latinos going to the right were based on exit polls. But the UTLA Latino Policy Institute actually did an analysis of the actual voting results. And for the largest sector of Latino voters, which are Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, and voters from Central America, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, overwhelmingly, from 70% plus to 75% and higher, voted for Democrats. Now, of course, when you look at Florida, it's not surprising that the large Cuban population there has been pretty solidly Republican, and it hasn't changed. I think there was some blips in earlier elections, but they pretty much solidly in the Republican corner, and that's their payoff that they've had for decades for the role that they played in supporting U.S. foreign policy against Cuba and in Latin America. So I think that's the case, but there are issues. There's things to worry about. For example, in South Texas, which is one of the poorest regions in the country, there has been an increased vote for the Republicans, and that is worrisome. I think the Republican vote in Arizona in 2020 was the Latino vote in Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, California was largely decisive in those elections in 2020, and I think that's often overlooked. This election will tell us a lot. I think it's, we can't say because not all of the results are in, but I think the assertion that a lot of the media has made is that the Latinos are going towards the GOP has not been proven accurate. And I think, as you stated, I think about the left media, they continue to invisibilize a lot of the, not just Latino voters, but Latino social movements.
And what do you mean by that?
There's not a lot of coverage. When they talk about the Fight for 15, you wouldn't know that Latinos have played such an important role in a lot of these very, very important struggles in fighting against voter suppression in areas like Arizona and Texas and other areas. A lot of that has been led by Latinos, Chicanos, mainly in those areas. And I think that continues to be a problem. I think that the framework often is seen as a white-black framework. And of course, the Black liberation struggle is extremely important struggle and should be given even more attention than it does. But there are other social movements, and the Chicano population represents about 40 million people in very strategic areas of this country, not just electorally, but just from the standpoint of the economy, of relationships with the border with Mexico. There's a lot that needs to be, I think, paid attention to there. And in areas such as the fight for educational justice, to expand voting rights and democracy, in support of women's reproductive rights and reproductive justice, environmental and climate justice. Latinos are playing a very, very active and important role in all of those social movements and does not get the coverage that it deserves.
I think next week we're anticipating Donald Trump to announce his nomination for the presidency once again. He said on the 15th, I believe, that he'll be making a special announcement, and that's what most people are expecting him to do. What do you think that means? And as you laid out, Bill, the Latino community is a very diverse community. But what do you think another Trump presidency means for the Latino community as a whole? And do you think if Donald Trump was the nominee, he could grow the number of Latino voters who joined the Republican Party the way he did with African Americans?
Yeah, I think it's not another question. I think there's a lot of factors that contribute to that, but we should listen to what he says. And he has not changed his position on immigration, on building the border wall, he's promising a ethnic cleansing of 11 to 12 million undocumented people in this country, the majority of whom are Latino. That is part of his program, and that is what is a major appeal to his base among white folks. That's a major element of his appeal that it would be very, very difficult for him to mitigate. So I think that's the issue. I think the larger question becomes about, what does the labor movement and social movements, what kind of organizing do we do, not just at election time, but all the time around to defend immigrants' rights? And the Democrats have to stop being so defensive around the issue of immigration and stand up strongly for the fact of immigrants' rights are human rights, and that people who are coming here as refugees and asylum seekers are entitled to our protection, just as are the refugees coming from Ukraine. And I think that has to be a key element of the work here. But I think there also has to be a lot of emphasis on standing up against these attacks on ethnic studies, which would include the study of the history of Latinos in this country, which is a magnificent history of one of oppression and resistance, of affordable housing, of environmental and climate justice. These are all issues that strongly impact our communities, the economy. The best economic stimulus for any community in this country is unionization. And we need a strong support for the rights the rights to unionize. Right now, it's extremely challenging to unionize in this country. And these are the kinds of things that really affect our community. Overwhelming majority of our folks are working class. And there's a huge sector that are continue to live in poverty or near poverty. And the best anti-poverty program is unionization.
And finally, Bill, it'll be interesting to see. It's actually now possible with Fetterman being declared the winner, at least by CNN in Pennsylvania, actually flipping a seat from red to blue. And we'll still have to see what happens in other races. It's far from over. But there's also the possibility that Democrats could actually pick up a seat in the Senate and actually have a true majority of 51 in the Senate rather than the 50-50 tie. We are also hearing, and we're down to our final minute, so it's a very big question here, so forgive me for this, but we're also hearing that if the Republicans control one of the two bodies, and perhaps the House of Representatives, what issue could a Republican-controlled House or even potentially Congress strike a deal with a Democratic-controlled White House? A lot of people are saying immigration. What would that mean to you?
Well, that's a scary thought in many ways, because the Republicans don't seem that John McCain co-authored immigration reform bill that had a lot of progressive elements to it, including a path to citizenship, and the Republicans have pretty much just shot down any effort to get anything close to that. So it concerns me about what the trade-off might be for some minimal improvements in, for example, allowing people family reunification or increasing the number of people who can come here legally. I think it might mean a further militarization of the border, ramped up deportations. I think it's very, very concerning, and I think but we shouldn't rely on the Democratic Party to do this. Social movements have to play a decisive role in advocating for a progressive program and working for that in a coordinated way. And I think this requires something we are in short supply, which is the kind of unity we need between labor, social movements, civil rights organizations, women's organizations, environmental justice and environmental organizations. We need to get down from our mountain strongholds and come together as a unified force to not only beat back the red tide and beat back this new Confederacy, this emerging new Confederacy, but to really advance a progressive program.
Bill Gallegos, we're going to have to leave it there, the tyranny of the clock, but I thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Pleasure, Mitch, as always. Thank you so much.
And you are listening to KPFA special broadcast of our coverage of the 2022 midterm election. I'm Mitch Jeserich. Coming up in the second half of today's show, we'll return to Mark Miracle and Ariel Boone for more coverage of local races and other election issues. But first, we get the very latest in returns from Max Pringle.
Hi, Max Pringle with these state and local returns. Governor Gavin Newsom is being projected to win re-election with about 30% of the votes counted. Newsom is polling at about 60%, with his Republican rival State Senator Brian Dahle at about 38%. Newsom addressed supporters shortly after polls closed on the West Coast. He referenced the state's apparent overwhelming passage of Proposition 1. That measure would enshrine reproductive choice in the state constitution.
We are a freedom state, that we support the rights of women and girls, reproductive care, reproductive rights now are enshrined in the Constitution of the state of California. Contraceptive rights are enshrined in the Constitution of the state of California. Privacy is enshrined. That's a point of pride.
Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis is on her way to re-election. She's polling at about 62%. GOP challenger Angela Jacobs, 38%. Secretary of State Shirley Weber is on her way to keeping her job as the state's top elections official. With early returns coming in, Weber has about 62% of the vote. Republican challenger and businessman Rob Bernowski trails with about 38%. In the state controller's race, Democrat Malia Cohen is comfortably ahead of challenger Alani Chin, 57% to 43%. That's with about 31% or so of votes counted. Democratic State Treasurer Fiona Ma is projected to be on her way to re-election with about a third of votes in. She's leading Republican Jack Guerrero 61 to 38%. Incumbent Attorney General Rob Bonta is cruising early. The Democrat is polling at about 62%. Republican Nathan Hochman has about 39% support. In the race for state insurance commissioner, incumbent Democrat Ricardo Lara holds a big early lead over Republican challenger Robert Howell. Howell is a cybersecurity specialist. Lara leads with about 63.5% of the vote to Howell's 36%. In other statewide propositions, Prop 26, which would allow sports betting on tribal land, is trailing early with 55% against. Prop 27, which would legalize online sports betting, is also going down with 72% against. Prop 28, which would increase school arts funding, is polling at about 76% in favor. Prop 29, which regulates staffing of kidney dialysis clinics, has about 60% support. Prop 30, the closely watched measure to tax the wealthy to support electric car purchases, has about 68% support. And Prop 31, which upholds the state's ban on the sale of flavored tobacco, has about 76% support. Meanwhile, Democratic U.S. Senator Alex Padilla will keep his seat with about 30% of precincts reporting. Padilla is polling at about 64% to Republican challenger, Southern California Attorney Mark Muser's 36%. In the race to replace outgoing Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, Congresswoman Karen Bass trails challenger and real estate billionaire Rick Caruso. Bass was polling at about 49%. Caruso leads with just about 51%. Caruso spent about $100 billion on his campaign and only joined the Democratic Party in the last few months. In two big mayor's races, Oakland City Council member Lauren Taylor has about 35% of the vote in the first round of ranked choice voting. Fellow council member Ching Tao has about 29% so far. They're both running to replace termed-out Mayor Libby Schaaf. In San Jose's mayor's race, council member Matt Mahan was holding a slight lead with about 50.3% of the vote to Santa Clara County Supervisor Cindy Chavez's 49.6%. They're running to fill outgoing Mayor Sam Liccardo, who is also termed out. In San Francisco, Prop M, the vacancy tax measure, has about 55% support so far. And Berkeley, another vacancy tax initiative, also called Measure M, is winning with about 61% of the vote. In the race for district attorney, current DA Brooke Jenkins has 49% support to challenger John Hamasaki's 33%. In the District 6 supervisor's race, Matt Dorsey has 56% support to challenger Honey Mahogany's 38%. In the District 4 supervisor's race, incumbent Democrat Gordon Marr trails early to challenger Joel Engardio. Marr's polling at about 48.5% to Engardio's 51.5%. Public defender Manu Raju appears to hold a big early lead. He's got about 70% support. Challenger Rebecca Fing Young is polling at about 30%. In San Francisco's 17th Assembly District, incumbent Matt Haney is holding off a challenge from fellow Democrat and former Supervisor David Campos. Haney is polling at about 70% to Campos's 30%. In the South Bay race to replace retiring Congresswoman Jackie Spear, Kevin Mullen has about 57% support to challenger David Canepa's 43%. In the District 12 North Bay Assembly District, Marin County Supervisor Damon Connolly has about 54% of the vote to fellow Democrat and California Coastal Commissioner Sarah Imanzade's 45%. That's it for the latest state and local headlines. I'm Max Pringle for KPFA.
And we are joined now in our coverage on the midterm elections here on KPFA by Irene Kao, who is Executive Director of Courage California, which backs progressive causes and candidates during the election season. Irene Kao, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me tonight.
Probably at the top of your organization's agenda in terms of the state propositions was proposition number 1, the constitutional amendment putting the right to abortion and safe contraception into the California Constitution. It's leading by more than 2/3, about 68% of the vote, approving that constitutional amendment to the California Constitution. Your reaction to that?
It's really exciting. It's also very consistent with what we've seen in polling, including our own polling that we did in some of the key battleground congressional districts in the Central Valley, Inland Empire, and Orange County. It seems to be one of those issues, protecting abortion, that cut across a lot of lines. But we did see stronger support among Democrats, among women, but also quite a bit of strong support from men as well, and especially a lot of support from young voters. But again, the support and what we're seeing in early returns is showing that the support sort of went beyond what people would typically expect as the supporters for this.
Now, part of the reason that progressives wanted to see this amendment on the ballot was to mobilize the progressive vote for other measures. Do you think that that's happened? Can you see a result of that tonight in the other returns?
I think it's really too early to tell. I think once we see more results come in and sort of weigh them against where candidates were sort of campaigning on Prop 1 as sort of the distinguishing issue, we'll just have to see. But one of the things that I also find really promising too is that we're also seeing that abortion is winning across the country. So in Michigan and Vermont, I've also seen the returns on that looking very good as well. So it does seem like it was a sort of rallying issue. I'm hoping that it did also, again, like bring other favorable results. But right now it's too early to tell, but still hopeful at least about having, again, really strong support for Prop 1. And what we're also hopeful for is, given that California also has a tendency to lead in terms of policies and new laws that protect, that expand rights and protections for the nation, we're also hoping that Proposition 1 becomes sort of a blueprint for other states to follow as well.
Any other of these state propositions that Courage California was particularly interested in?
Yeah, we have been really strong supporters of Proposition 30. And that is partly because we work really closely with the California Environmental Voters, who's one of the leaders on that campaign. And for Proposition 30, that held interest and priority for us for two reasons. One, because it was a tax on the wealthy that would then help to subsidize electric vehicle infrastructure and wildfire protection for all Californians, but also because in the proposition there was specific equity language built in there. So at least half of the funds that were raised were going to be used to subsidize electric vehicle infrastructure in heavily polluted communities and low-income communities. And that was a really important part of it as well. So it's a little, we'll see how it is. It's a little disappointing. We're seeing some early returns showing that it's behind, but we're still hopeful that this will be close and that hopefully it prevails.
The opponent said, though, it's a handout to particularly Lyft, the so-called ride sharing, the online taxi service is what it really is. How do you respond to that? Why should we give this corporation, this for-profit corporation, a subsidy like this, even though it's indirect?
Right. So I do think it is generally good for voters to be suspicious and cautious about ballot measures that are funded by large corporations like Lyft. So obviously in 2020, we opposed them on Proposition 22. The reality in California is that unfortunately it is really expensive to run and win ballot measures at the state level. And so it is really hard for social justice movement and equity-based organizations to really run a ballot measure in the same way that others can. But to speak more directly to the point that you made, Lyft is one of the largest funders on this, but it's really clear we went in because this was co-written by California environmental voters and other environmental organizations and leaders. And while Lyft will benefit from a proposition like this, they're such a small piece of the pie here in California that this really losing Prop 30 is a big loss for us as a whole state, because this being miscast as sort of a lift carve out means that the remaining 99% that would have gone to subsidize electric vehicles for individuals and families and low income communities gets lost in the bigger picture.
Now, how about candidates that that Courage California were particularly interested in backing in this election?
Mm-hmm. So Courage, because we do year-round accountability and electoral work, we especially focus on the state legislature because we have our voter guide, but we also have our Courage score, which is our annual legislative report card. And so here in California, we have the ability to not just elect Democrats, but actual progressive Democrats. And so we've been really focused on trying to get more progressive Democrats elected in the state legislature, because right now, a lot of corporate-backed Democrats are really, they have a lot of power to sort of kill, gut, and amend bills that we would hope otherwise that Democrats would support. So we've been keeping our eye on a lot of different races around the state, like in a couple of Senate districts, like Senate District 8 between Dave Jones and Angelique Ashby, Senate District 10 between Aisha Wahab and Lily May. And there's quite a few. There's a lot of exciting progressive candidates running this election cycle, and we're really hoping they win. We're seeing some really promising early returns. A few of our endorsed candidates.
How about the district attorney races? I'm thinking of the ones especially in Alameda County and in San Francisco.
Yes. So we came out against the recall of Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, and we endorsed John Humsaki for district attorney just because it's been very clear how the current San Francisco district attorney has really gone backwards on some of the progress that we had seen under Chesa. So her reinstituting, potentially punishing 16 and 17-year-olds as adults, being a really good example, firing a lot of key staff who are instrumental to things, to different departments. And then when it comes to Alameda County, this one's very personal to me. I live in Oakland in Alameda County. And so Pamela Price really represents somebody who is very dedicated to reforms, really understands why the district attorney currently isn't working, isn't doing very well by communities. And she's been very clearly dedicated to working with communities. And we also knew going into this race that in order for somebody like Pamela Price, who has a very clear reform agenda, for her to be successful in that office, she needs the support of community, and she needs community members to keep showing up to co-govern with her and to keep that public pressure on to keep her in office and to show that the public really supports the reforms that she's pushing. So again, we're watching that race really closely too, and hoping that she prevails in that race as well.
All right, Irene Gao, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Irene Gao is Executive Director of Courage California. And now joining us from Fresno, California is KPFA's Central Valley correspondent, Vic Bedoyan. Vic, a couple of congressional races in the Central Valley may determine whether or not the Republicans actually achieve their goal tonight of regaining control of the House of Representatives.
Well, that's right, Mark. With the close competition for the House in play tonight, which party gets control of the House may very well be decided by California's congressional races. And actually three of those hotly contested races are right here in the San Joaquin Valley. The most targeted race in terms of money and attention from the national campaign committees was the 22nd district, where it's a new district. David Valadao is an incumbent congressman, an incumbent Republican. He is running against Rudy Salas, who is a California State Assembly member. And it was a very, very expensive race, one of the most expensive in the country, as I'm understanding from the reporting from the Fresno Bee. And also, there was just a flood of very negative ads, particularly during the playoffs and the World Series, that Republicans bought a lot of airtime, really slamming Rudy Salas. And something that really hurt him was he declined to take part in the debate between him and Valadao. And I think that was not a good look for him. The other very hotly contested race, and one that was targeted again by the national campaigns, was the 9th district, where Josh Harder, who is an incumbent, but he was an incumbent in a different district, in the 10th district. Now, in the 9th district, he decided to run when Jerry McNerney, who was a very successful Democrat over several terms, decided to run in that district. And his competition was a San Joaquin County supervisor, Tom Patty. This area, his district, is pretty much the area around Stockton and the West Delta region. So that said, the latest reporting that I have from the Secretary of State shows David Valadao leading, Rudy Salas very narrowly leading David Valadao. It's a very close race with 61% of the precincts reporting. In the 9th district, Josh Harder is ahead of Tom Patty, 61% to 38.6%, and that's with only 11% of the precincts reporting. The other big hot race was in the 13th district, where Democrat Adam Gray was squaring off against Republican John Duarte, another race which was seen as a toss-up. In that race, Adam Gray is leading John Duarte 52 to 47%. And in that precinct, or in that district rather, 85% of the precincts have already reported. So those are the really the races that were the closest and the toughest. And we still don't know the results of those contests yet, of course.
And we may not for at least a couple of days. Thank you very much, Vic Vadoyan, reporting from Fresno about the 3 congressional races that may or may not give the Republican Party control of the House of Representatives. In Richmond, the city of Richmond is deciding who will be the next mayor, and it's also deciding whether to impose rent control. And we turn to KPFA's Ariel Boone for those stories.
Sense.
Yeah, so even though Richmond is a small city in the Bay Area, the stakes for progressive politics are always really high here. We have one of the biggest refineries on the West Coast, which is Chevron. And we also, in the past couple of years, have done one of the most ambitious reallocations from the police budget to social services, such as mental health support, a crisis response team, and also investment in education or career training for young people. And so, usually we are used to seeing attacks on progressive candidates from Chevron. We're now really seeing it in this election cycle, even more than usual, from the police union, from big corporations because of a gross receipts tax that we passed a few years ago. And then, of course, there's always the politics of being a refinery town. And so those are the stakes, and you know, we've been spent against really heavily by all of the aforementioned players. And then we have Eduardo, who was, you know, is vice mayor currently, and if he wins, will be Richmond's first elected Latino mayor. He, you know, was a public school teacher for 20 years, and as council member has, you know, helped to make Richmond a sanctuary city. He is, you know, known as a really strong environmental justice candidate. He's raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour. He's passed a, you know, a ban on transporting coal in the city of Richmond. So really what we've seen in this election is a race between someone who really stands for environmental justice and economic equity versus two very strong law and order candidates, and who've been also backed by big corporations. Those are generally the stakes and always the stakes in Richmond in our politics. Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, one thing that's been at stake is Measure U, and that's the gross receipts tax that I mentioned. So, you know, we passed with a resounding mandate in Richmond. I think 73% of voters in 2020 approved a gross receipts tax on the biggest corporations in Richmond, which is going to bring in a ton of money into the city. And as a result, we've seen in this election cycle a pretty big capital strike by corporations. Now, Chevron actually struck a tax settlement with the city years ago, where they're basically subject to no new taxes for the next couple years. But in a couple years, Measure U will kick in for Chevron, and we don't know what that's going to look like, but we envision that it's going to really increase their tax burden. And so, you know, Eduardo has been the only candidate that's supported upholding this really popular and really necessary tax measure, whereas other candidates have tried to overturn it. And so, you know, a lot of holding Chevron to account is making sure that the corporation pays its fair share. You know, we see that it does a lot of philanthropic work in the community in order to sort of whitewash what it's done to residents, but we still have a city that's really a frontline community. People's health is much, particularly their respiratory health, is much poorer in Richmond than in surrounding areas, particularly children. And as
Thank you. For joining us.
Thanks.
We have Tony.
Bill Boone is one of our co-hosts for our coverage tonight, which is now concluding, thanks to Mitch Jeserich, who also co-hosted our coverage tonight of the midterm elections 2022. For more coverage, be sure to join us on the Upfront program tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. Thanks to Christina Onestad, who executive produced this program. Corinne Smith was the producer. Avery Luke was assistant producer. Mike Cohn was our line producer. Rod Akeel was operating the controls tonight. Eileen Alfendary and Max Pringle were our news headline anchors. Thanks to our reporters, Ellie Prickett Morgan, Andy Spivak, Emmett Levy, Karen Argood, and Vic Bedoyan. Miko Tolliver produced our social media coverage. Peter Stickney was our camera operator. Glenn Reeder and Laura Privis provided their monitoring services. You're listening to KPFA 94.1 FM, KPFB 89.3 in Berkeley, KFCF 88.1 in Fresno. I'm Mark Miracle. Good night.
Domestic violence and murder rates will evaporate. More common sense and less need for thoughts and prayers.